Good evening guys, this is Animesh from Aerobic Animal Training, and in this video we will basically talk about the meaning of strength. I've written my thoughts down here, and I'll try to give you guys a fundamental understanding of what strength basically is, because anybody that is programming exercise for an outcome, for any specific outcome, the success of which has a correlation to strength. So if you're training an athlete, if you're training yourself, and for a sport in which performance is highly correlated to strength, then you should have a very fundamental understanding of what strength actually is. Because we have a broad term, strength and conditioning, for all kinds of training that we do in sports, but the performance in any specific sport, it is either going to have a very high correlation with how strong you are or how strong your athlete is, or it's going to have a weak correlation, or it's going to have a moderate correlation with strength. So we need to understand what strength is so that we can understand if performance in our sport is actually correlated with strength or not, and to what degree if it is, and how to train for it, and how is training going to differ. And that is the purpose of this presentation. So we'll understand the fundamental concept of strength, and a lot of these ideas have been suggested by Dr. VM Zatsriovsky in his book, The Science and Practice of Strength Training, which I feel like is the Bible of understanding a lot of the conceptual knowledge that is to understand around ideas in strength training. A to Z of everything that you need to know in terms of how to program microcycles, mesocycles, macrocycles, and all of it. If you think about what strength actually means, it's basically always going to be a measure of how much muscular force an individual can produce, right? So if you think about it, let me give you guys an example. Think about these sports, right? Think about arm wrestling, think about powerlifting, and think about an activity such as pushing a truck, or think about tug of war. What do all these activities kind of have in common? What can you visualize when you think about these activities? Tug of war, arm wrestling, pushing a truck, although that's like a very, it's not a sport per se, but just think about that for a moment, right? These activities will always tell you exactly how strong a person is. If you want to know how strong a person is, have them do a tug of war against some other person. It's going to tell you how strong they are, right? Have them push a very heavy object or pull a very heavy object. That's what tug of war essentially is. Or have them do a 1 repetition maximum lift in some kind of a powerlifting lift, bench press, squat, deadlift, whatever that is. And what do all these activities have in common? What do all these activities fundamentally consist of? They consist of a maximally heavy external load against which the individual has to either generate force, or a maximally heavy external force that is being exerted on the individual, to which the individual has to yield. That's basically the prerequisite for strength. Strength is nothing but an individual's capacity or individual's ability to generate maximal muscular forces while interacting with a proportionately high, maximally high external force. So any kind of activity, if you see, it's basically an interaction between two bodies. One of them is the individual themselves, and the other thing is the other object or other entity that they are kind of interacting with. And every single activity is going to be an interaction of forces between these two bodies. So, and I've said this in a lot of presentations that I've done before as well, even when the external force is not obviously apparent, right? Where such as in a lot of weighted exercise, the other object that you're interacting with is very obviously apparent. It's either a dumbbell, it's a barbell, or whatever else, whatever object you're kind of working with. But in activities such as push-ups or running, simply jogging or sprinting, sometimes it's not obviously clear to the observer what the other external object is. If you have nothing that you're kind of interacting with, you're always subject to the gravitational pull towards the ground, right? So when you're running, you're pushing off against the ground, and that's how you produce force. When you do push-ups, you push off against the ground, you yield to gravity is being exerted on your body, you yield to gravity, and then you push off against the ground, against gravity, and produce force. So there's always an interaction between two bodies in any kind of movement, in any kind of exercise. Strength is basically measured, or you get to know how strong a person is when this external force that is present, this external mass that is present, is maximally high. Let's say I hold this pen, right? Why is holding this pen not a true measure of maximal strength, because in both, it doesn't matter if I hold a 100 kg heavy loaded barbell or if I hold a pen. In both of these cases, fundamentally my muscles are contracting. That's what facilitates movement. That's how we are afforded movement, right? Our muscles contract, and that's how we are able to move the skeleton. But to hold this pen, my muscles do not need to generate maximal amounts of forces. They do not need to generate really high amounts of tension. Because why? Because this external object, this external mass that I am interacting with is not of substantial mass. There's no force to it, right? It's very light. It's of negligible weight. So my muscles do not have to generate maximal amounts of forces, and that is why holding a pen is never going to be a true measure of how strong I am. But trying to hold a barbell that is maximally or supramaximally loaded, that's higher than maximal, right? That is always going to be a true measure of how strong I am, because that is a external object of substantial mass, right? Gravity acting on it is a substantial force. And if I try to generate my muscular forces to kind of pick something like that off the floor, or generate force against such an externally heavy mass, then that is always going to be a true measure of strength, because I'll be maximally utilizing all of my muscular forces.